My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas. Welcome back. We are heading into part 2 of a really fascinating conversation with Andy Fox, longtime reporter for WAVY TV10 here in the Norfolk market. For those of you who are from Virginia, which I'm not.
But I am.
But you are. And I've watched him on TV. Very important that you probably listened to episode 1 last week, because you actually come in mid-conversation here in number 2. Any confession to illegal behavior should be just let it all just go by, and let's not fixate on it, shall we?
Yeah, let's not fixate it. You can take it with a grain of salt.
Right, exactly. Hey, what's a little trespass between friends?
Yes, precisely.
It's a great conversation, and we hope you enjoy it.
And you get some true confessions with Bill and Kristin in the middle of it.
As always, we wanted to thank you for your support of Mind Over Murder and remind you, especially our newest listeners, and there are a whole bunch of you, that ratings and reviews are incredibly important to the success of this podcast. So when you listen, please take a few minutes and give us a 5-star review and say wonderful things about Kristin Dilley. And you can say so-so things about me. I've got a thick skin.
I didn't prompt him to say that. By the way, that was all Bill.
As long as you say wonderful things about Kristin, it's all good. But we very much appreciate your support. A 5-star review and a couple of sentences about why you think Mind Over Murder is worth your time. It's interesting, Jim Clemente, our FBI profiler on the Lover's Lane murders, and he and I have spent a lot of time out on the Colonial Parkway as well. At the risk of confessing that we trespassed, we did go into a number of closed areas of of the Colonial Park.
Bill, you have free reign. You can do whatever you want, brother. You do whatever you want. You've been through so much. You are entitled to do whatever you want.
Without sounding like I'm outing a certain Kristin Dilley, I know that she was exploring some closed picnic areas. There's another picnic area, by the way, on the other side of the Cheatham Annex Overlook. The Belfield Plantation picnic area is also closed.
Yep.
And that goes way back into the woods. It's actually very pretty. That's also closed. And I
may or may not have gone to that one.
Perhaps you may or may not have gone to it.
I may or may not have gone to that one.
Fairly recently,
Fairly recently, I may or may not have gone to that one.
Both of those closed picnic areas, which are much more private and would have allowed an opportunity for a couple to be a little more romantic, are on either side of the Cheatham Annex Overlook. Back to your point, though, Andy, our FBI profiler, Jim Clemente, he felt that there were elements of the way Keith's car was found at the York River Overlook that made it feel like whoever dropped the car off there, obviously we don't know where the bodies are. Jim felt that they were trying to create the impression that Keith and Sandy's murder, at that point disappearance, was somehow related to Kathy and Becky's murder a year and a half before. They do feel very similar, and Jim felt like there might be an attempt to create a similar situation, even if the murderer of Keith and Sandy, and I think it's a fair assumption that Keith and Sandy are gone, considering they've been missing since 1988, there's an attempt to make it look like, or even stage the scene to make Keith and Sandy look like Kathy and Becky in incident number 1. It's an interesting theory.
Yeah, I just really think those two are absolutely related. And Knobling and Edwards, I believe that. It's the New Kent County one that I just can't, unless you accept my premise on that, then I can ignore. But let's think for a second here. Let's say none of them are related. You got to be kidding me.
I know.
How can we think that these all are unrelated? Because that, for me, is unbelievable that we would have all of this going on. And in all of these cases, law enforcement can't find anything. And they're all unrelated.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the Brian Pettinger and the Laurie Ann Powell cases, which have often been roped in with the Colonial Parkway murders? Do you have any thoughts on those?
I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I've shared them with Bill. I think that they both were found in the James River. They were both found in the James River. And back in the day, I'm trying to find it now. I did a story on Brian Pettinger, and of course, they're in the river. Mm-hmm. Well, they're in the James River, and the two of them.
And they both work for Liberty Security, later called Advanced Security. So there's two murders where there's a direct link to Liberty Security. And then oddly, in the Colonial Parkway murders, and these are the kind of things that there isn't enough time in a television series to get into this level of detail. You also have other homicides in the Colonial Parkway series where people have relationships to Liberty Security. They're not as direct as Brian Pettinger and Laurie Ann Powell working at Liberty Security, but they're worth talking about. Robin Edwards' mother worked in Liberty Security in the office as an assistant. That's Bonnie Edwards. And it's a bit of a stretch, but Terry Haley dated a Newport News and later Gloucester deputy sheriff when they were both single and working for the Newport News Police Department. He moonlighted shifts at Liberty Security and was friendly with Ron Little, the owner of Liberty Security. So here you have 6 murders, 4 separate incidents. 2 have a direct connection to Liberty Security, and 2 have a more tenuous kind of relationship to Liberty Security. It's very odd that all of these people, and as you said, you've got Brian Pettinger and Laurie Ann Powell both being murdered, both being dumped in the James River in 1988. This is all at the same time the other Colonial Parkway murders are going on. It's a very odd through line to have all of these people connected to a relatively small security company. And they had contracts with the Little Sioux convenience stores and Rose's department store and other retail outlets where they provided security. I'm sorry, Kristin, go ahead.
There's the Ames department store as well, I believe.
You are correct.
Yeah.
And so we have in 86, we have the 2.
Kathy and Becky.
And then in September of 87, we have Edwards and Knobling, September of 87.
Right.
And then in February of 88, we have Pettinger.
Right.
And then 2 months later, in April of 88, we have Laurie Ann Powell.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, Call and Haley are also gone in April 88.
Yeah, it's within weeks. What are the chances?
I just absolutely think I've never understood why Pettinger and Laurie Ann Powell have not been considered part of the Colonial Parkway murders.
Brian Pettinger and Laurie Ann Powell's murders are mentioned so often that sometimes people think they're a couple, which they are not. Brian Pettinger was married to another young woman at that time. By the way they're killed, knives are used and there's restraints used in the Pettinger and Powell example. I know Brian Pettinger was tied up. There are some very strong parallels. And we call it Liberty Security, but after John Hawthorne, the previous owner, had sold the company to Ron Little, the company's name changed to Advanced Security. Typically we'll say Liberty. I just find it very strange that all of these people are linked to this relatively small company and they're going missing and they're going murdered. It strikes me as very odd.
So then we start thinking about the name that you mentioned and how he was deported.
He was deported in August 1989 back to his native New Zealand. And I'm not saying that he's a murderer, but I will say this. It seems coincidental that the murders appear to stop around the time that he's deported back to New Zealand. It seems odd.
Except for the one in September, Labor Day of 89, Of course, that was after August of 89.
Correct. Although I am of the
opinion,
opinion,
we're say they aren't related.
I am of the opinion that Phelps-Lauer is not related. Also, something we did not cover in the television series, which should have been covered. It was in the earlier episodes, but through the editing process, this got dropped, and I think it was a mistake in retrospect. There's a large amount of money missing in case number 4 with Phelps-Lauer. Daniel Lauer had collected $600 to $800 from painting jobs he had done that summer, house painting jobs. And he was heading to Virginia Beach to move in with his brother Clint and his brother Clint's girlfriend, Anna Maria, to help them pay the bills for this new apartment that they've gotten down in Virginia Beach. And they were really struggling financially. The electricity had been turned off. They were doing burger flipping jobs down there in Virginia Beach and just getting by. So Daniel's heading down there with his brother's girlfriend with a large amount of money. $600 to $800 is a lot of money in my world, and it was a tremendous amount of money in 1989. And that money and that wallet go missing. And we should have mentioned that in the Lover's Lane murders, because there's a situation where, unlike the other double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders, there could be a robbery motive in Phelps-Lauer on I-64, which is absent in the other double homicides.
Right, because the wallets are all left behind, and with David's wallet on the dash and this. But was there money found in those wallets and in the purse?
In Kathy and Becky's example, I know there was money in their wallets, and Kathy's purse was open and her wallet was on the floor with money inside it. So robbery does not appear to be a motive there. If I'm not mistaken, my recollection is that in David Knobling, there is a suspect who has since died who was named by the sheriff, who claimed that he was there the night that Robin and David were killed. He claimed to have nothing to do with the murder, but he did say that he had taken money from David's wallet, which was on the dashboard of the Ford pickup truck. My recollection in case number 3, Call Haley, is that there was some money in Keith Call's wallet, which was on the center console, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not seeing much of a pattern of robbery except in case number 4, Phelps-Lauer, where the wallet with all the cash goes missing and is never found. And there were some people, including some people that were pretty sketchy, in my opinion, that knew that Daniel was going to be collecting money from painting jobs that summer. So there may be a robbery motive there in the last incident that I just don't see in the others.
Why, Bill, why has Pettinger and Laurie and Powell never been included in the conversations of the Colonial Parkway murders? From the time when they started looking into all of the cases again, how come they never popped in and became part of the discussion?
I'm not sure. I personally never felt that Brian Pettinger and Laurie Ann Powell got anywhere near the media coverage that the other murders had gotten. They were individual murders and not couples murders. I'm not sure. I know that there's a lot.
That's true. That what you just said is true. They did not get the coverage. And I'll be honest with you. I've done so many stories on all these others, and I just did 1 or 2 on each of those. Although for a little period of time there, the Laurie Ann Powell one, that got some traction. That came for a little while, at least.
Laurie Ann Powell, there's a possibility that her late boyfriend might have had something to do with her murder, because they were arguing that night and he supposedly dropped her off in an odd spot and then left her there when they were in mid-argument. So there's a possibility.
And left her walking along the road?
Yes. Yeah. There's a possibility that I think the now deceased boyfriend may have had something to do with her murder. But at the same time, as we were talking about a moment ago, there is this very odd Liberty Security / Advanced Security connection to a number of these murders. People are asking a ton of questions now of Kristin and me on social media and on various websites that discuss these cases. And a lot of people are saying, why aren't Brian Pettinger and Laurie Ann Powell's murders lumped in? They're, as you pointed out a moment ago, Andy, they're at exactly the same time as the Call Haley disappearance. They bracket it. It's within weeks of the Call Haley disappearance. We wanted to ask you a question,
Yeah. So, Andy, you have a really unique viewpoint here because you have been covering this case from the very beginning. So how would you say that the media coverage over the last 30 years has helped the investigation into the Colonial Parkway murders? Because Bill and I have noticed that things seem to go a little bit faster along investigative routes, shall we say, when there has been a big media story, for example, about the cases. So how would you say that the media coverage has helped the investigation?
Well, I was thinking about why Pettinger and Laurie and Powell wasn't lumped in to the Colonial Parkway is because it wasn't done by law enforcement because they weren't looking for two more. You know what I mean? They weren't looking for more because they're having a tough time dealing with the 8 that they're dealing with. We don't need let's not bring attention to that is one of the reasons why I think that those two have not been aggressively included in the discussion from the side of law enforcement on, oh, by the way, they don't want to talk about that because then that's 2 more, right? Sure. That they haven't been able to solve. Makes sense. And I think that I think the coverage has been important in keeping the story alive. I can't tell you. And by the way, this is the 35th anniversary of the first one. This is the 35th year. Kathy and Becky. Have you been thinking about that, Bill?
I always push back because it's not the 35th anniversary until October, and we have a lot of work to do between now and October. It's definitely something that's weighing on my mind and on my brothers as well. And it's very frustrating to see this case just stretch on and on when experts tell me these are solvable cases. It's all about time, attention, and resources, though. Law enforcement, unfortunately, gets pulled off of cases like ours, and they have to handle new terrible things that have happened.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I think I can only speak for WAVY TV. We've dedicated a lot of time to covering these. We will not forget. Absolutely. We won't forget. We're just not going to forget. I will spend the rest of my journalistic career in this market continuing to do those stories. And certainly in October, when we realized 35 years unsolved.
My goal is to solve this murder between now and October.
If there's anyone that can do it, Bill, it's you. Yeah. But I just think that this has just shown the inability for law enforcement to figure this out. And I know it's tough. It's tough to do. It's easy for me to sit there and say that we have 8 of these. And then we're talking about people who are thinking that they aren't related. I mean, that just really complicates the story, doesn't it?
Forever.
Kristin, doesn't that really, to actually suggest that none of these are related?
The idea that there might be 4 potential murderers out there who have never been caught over 35 years certainly gives me, as you said, the heebie-jeebies, especially as a local and as someone who grew up being told, don't drive on the parkway at night. Just don't.
4 and maybe 6, Pettinger and Powell.
Yeah.
I'm just as Bill, Irv Wells, who was the special agent in charge, he'd just come on, and this is the great regret of his career. And he had a stellar career, Irv Wells did. And this is the thing. I've had a great career, but.
Yeah, it's funny. I've done 2 lengthy interviews with Irv Wells and with Joe Wolfinger, who also worked as the SAC around that time. And both gentlemen, both times that we've interviewed them for hours, have both said this case, the Colonial Parkway Murders, is the single greatest regret of their professional lives. This is the one that got away. Irv and Joe, I hope I'm not talking out of school here, are very close, and they get together with their wives, and they also get together separately. And I've been to both of their homes, as I said, twice for lengthy interviews. And they mentioned that they get together for weekends to do stuff, and sometimes as a couple, as couples, and sometimes just the 2 of them. They said this case, when they're sitting there late at night staring into a fireplace, this is the case they talk about, which actually I was very touched by, because it's amazing to me that these incredible investigators are still talking about this case 30 some years later as the one that got away. Let me ask you a question, Andy, and this one might be a little bit challenging. Do you think the media coverage of the Colonial Parkway murders has ever hindered this investigation moving forward?
I always think more reporting is better than less reporting. I don't think it's obstructed the investigation. I don't believe that. I think that we need to report on this early and often and finding reasons to do another story on it, and to figure this out, because not only this is a black mark on our community, what's happened. I think that this is, when I think about what has happened, I just think that Hampton Roads is home to the Colonial Parkway murders.
Yeah. When we were working there with the television crew, and we were there for months actually over time, we actually stopped mentioning it because what was happening was that you're in restaurants. This is pre-COVID. We'd be in restaurants and coffee shops and that kind of thing. And you got a whole crew of people, and they notice you and your trucks and all that kind of stuff. And people were asking us, what are you guys here working on? Because it's very clear that we were a team of something. And we actually ended up just saying, we're working on a documentary. Because, boy, you want to talk about a conversation stopper or starter. If you mentioned, particularly to people that were a little bit older or had been around the area for a while, if you mentioned the Colonial Parkway murders, man, did folks have things to say. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. It's not that they weren't worthwhile, but if you were trying to have dinner or grab your coffee order for the rest of the crew or whatever, boy, if you brought up the Colonial Parkway murders, everybody was like, "Urgh." They wanted to talk. They wanted to talk about it. So after a while, we just said, we're working on a documentary, which was true. We were friendly. If someone knew what we were talking about, we would never deny it. If someone said, are you guys working on that series on the Colonial Parkway murders? We would say, yes, we are. But if someone was just putting the pancakes out or whatever, and they said, what are you guys here for? Because, there's 8 or 10 people at different times. We'd say, we're working on a documentary. And they'd say, that's interesting, because there's a lot of history in the area. And sometimes we didn't want to talk about it. And just to allow people to get on with their day-to-day business, whether it was making the coffee order or what have you. But it's amazing how folks in the area have a lot of thoughts about the case and the media coverage, and they are still concerned about the fact that these murders have gone unsolved for so long.
And I have a really good friend who I was really impressed. He watched every minute of the 4 hours.
Interesting.
And as a matter of fact, I have another friend whose father-in-law is FBI, and he and I are going to sit down in a coming weekend, and we are going to watch Lover's Lane, because I recorded it, of course, Lover's Lane Murders. And we're going to watch it. And in real time, I'm going to tell him what was going on at the time as the show is progressing.
Oh, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that one.
That sounds great.
It's going to be neat. And he's a longtime FBI guy. And I am looking for him watching that second hour on Nobbling Edwards, because that in and of itself, I want him to be with me so that he can understand where I was coming from at the time, watching this unfold in front of me, and how deeply saddened I was because of things that I knew that they had found out, but like when they were saying my brothers were standing in the doorway and then mentioned my name. And I just felt so sad because I didn't know all of that until I saw it. And it impacted me. It impacted. I'm looking forward to sitting down with an FBI guy and going through this. Mm-hmm. And Bill, I'll take some notes and let you and Kristin know what he says.
Yeah, I'd be very curious.
Sounds great. Yeah.
I can't wait for him to see the part about the park rangers and their ineptitude. I can't wait for that.
Yeah. Oof. The National Park Service to this day continues to be far less cooperative than they could be. I'll just mention something. A few years ago, the Call family had arranged for cadaver dogs to come in, and because it's very important to the Call and Haley families. And I understand this. They don't know what happened to Keith and Sandy, and this troubles them deeply. And there's a very strong personal connection that people have when they've lost loved ones in this way. They would like to recover their remains. It's not dissimilar to, I come from a military family, it's not dissimilar to a service person who is killed in action. They will make significant effort to recover his or her remains. It's a respect thing. Several years back, when the Call family had arranged for cadaver dogs to search some areas that they thought might be likely locations where Keith and Sandy's remains could be found. They brought in the top dog teams from the area, and all these folks are volunteers. I was so amazed by their willingness to help the Call and Haley families. But I got to say, the National Park Service, they were absolutely horrible. They did everything they could to prevent us from conducting searches for Keith and Sandy's remains, because I'm not kidding. They actually wrote to the Call and Haley families and said they didn't want any ground to be disturbed. Now, the only time you dig is if the dogs hit on remains, and then they indicate that there's something there that needs to be checked out. We were floored by how deeply unpleasant and unprofessional the National Park Service was in trying to prevent the Call and Haley families from searching. They weren't going in there with backhoes or anything crazy. They were just marching through the woods with dog teams, and the only time they would actually dig is if they found something. Now, in that example, we did find something, and the dogs hit. And interestingly, even though we weren't certain the FBI was taking this all that seriously, even though it was a Sunday and it was over 90 degrees, an evidence response team from the FBI raced in, secured the location, and on a Sunday in 90-degree weather, they dug that thing out. Now, in the end, there were human remains there, but that's an area with a tremendous amount of history, and they were unrelated to the Colonial Parkway murders, and they don't seem to be related to any homicide.
Was it like a grave?
Yeah, there are unmarked graves there, and those are historic sites and so on. So they found remains which were older. We just couldn't believe how incredibly unpleasant and how the National Park Service just seemed to want to throw roadblocks up. And we're not trying to create a disturbance, but it's still very important to the Call and Haley families that ultimately Keith and Sandy, their loved ones' remains are returned to them. This, by the way, this past week, the Alexis Murphy's remains were found up in Nelson County, Virginia. And again, that's a situation where she had gone missing in 2013. Kristin, do I have my date? Her remains were found in December, identified February 5th, and then they made the announcement, I think it's February 17th, if my memory is serving. Again, we know the Murphy family. It's really important to these families, as Andy, to recover their loved ones' remains, however little might be left at this point. I've never been able to get over how the National Park Service seems so much more concerned about disturbing a blade of grass along the Colonial Parkway than they are in getting to the bottom of who is responsible for the Colonial Parkway murders. I find it just so disturbing.
It reminds me of the saying that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And this is a perfect case in point, that foolish consistency on the part of the Park Service. Again, after all of these, who cares if they're digging? Who cares?
And as we said, whose
agenda are we fulfilling? Are we fulfilling the agenda of the Park Service and the Colonial Parkway and the federal land? Or are we going to allow a family, two families, and extended families devastated by this to have some peace? Where is the decency? You're refreshing my memory about this, Bill, because I was out of town when that happened and I was not covering it. But I think that if I were covering it and we were getting the pushback, that I would have pushed back. That's amazing to me.
Yeah. So
how many of those park rangers involved in April of 1988, the ones in question, are still alive?
A few. It's funny.
But the main ones, without mentioning any names, because I don't even know what the names are right now. But
yeah, I know some of the names.
I heard some have died, huh?
If they were older then, some of them are gone by now because we're talking about, 33 years later. Some of them are still alive. A couple of them are on the list of suspects, quite frankly.
I know they are. Of course. Yes.
But there are
moving the car, contaminated the crime scene. Was that done by mistake or was that on purpose?
Hard to say.
And then with the cover up to say, oh, we thought that it was an abandoned vehicle. Really? Under what circumstance would you have thought that?
And who takes away clothing to identify a potential offender, or in this case, a potential victim?
And refresh my memory. They took everything out of the car and left the car there. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then they are back at the park ranger office and they say, wait a second, we've got a missing person here. Cassandra Haley's family is saying that she's missing. Whoa, what's it? Then they go back and they put everything back in.
It's really weird.
Including the condom.
And the whole thing strikes me as very odd. To be fair to the Rangers, there are 150 persons of interest in the Colonial Parkway murders. That was several years ago. The list may have grown since then. As the investigators have explained to me, that doesn't mean there's 150 hot prospects. There's a long list and a short list. And over time, the list has grown to at least 150 potential suspects or persons of interest. The short list probably has, I'm guessing, 10 or 15 names on it, including some of the names that are known to us.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
We wanted to ask a question. Tell us how you came to be involved in the television series, The Lover's Lane Murders.
I got a call. I think I got referred by you. I think that you said, well, you may want to talk about this. And then you're also the one who told me, Andy, they're using you as a timestamp. That was the first time I heard that. I said, oh my, because I went up and Lonnie and I interviewed and I came back and I told my boss, I said, I don't know how much I added to it. I really don't. I don't know how much I added. And what I didn't know was we sent a lot of tape. We sent a lot of tape.
I saw that. Yeah.
And because this was NBC Universal and we're an NBC station. And Karen Granneman, a dear friend of mine who I used to work with, she was a photographer at the time covering some of these cases. Karen Granneman, just a dear treasured friend of mine. She spent a lot of time putting all that stuff together. Goes, Andy, oh my gosh, I'm looking at you all these years ago. And Bill, you and I have talked about, Kristin, the audio, my audio, I don't ever remember sounding like that.
You were really young.
and really young. And my current photographer, Rob, said, Rob, what is that voice? And he goes, it's analog audio over the course of time. And it's been altered by time. And it wasn't pristine. And remember, all of those stories, by the way, I used to work out of my townhome in Hampton.
Right.
And I didn't have a recording studio. I would go and record the audio in my house where I wish that I went outside and recorded the audio in the car because that is a more compressed area.
Right.
And the audio would have sounded better. And I think it is my audio is consistently bad. Okay. And I am convinced it's because I was recording it in my townhome without any type of nice cushion walls or anything. Mm-hmm. And it sounded tinny. The
timestamp thing came up later. I'll give you some background here.
Tell me how that came to be.
Okay. So Oxygen, who were kind enough to put the show together, is an NBC Universal company, as you mentioned, and WAVY is an NBC affiliate. So they wanted to use footage. And so they had requested from WAVY and other stations in the area, but I knew they were going to go heavy on NBC footage. But one of the things that the producers noticed was they were watching this footage. And I had said to them, you got to watch for Andy Fox, because Andy Fox is one of the reporters who has reported on this case since the very first incident. So look for footage of Andy Fox. And then one of the producers said, boy, the difference, and this is true of all of us, 30 years have gone by. And so there's this cub reporter, I say that with love. There's this really young guy, fresh out of school almost. I think that was your second television job, I think you told me. Professional television job after graduating from Syracuse. You look like a kid, because you are. And then they interviewed you just a year or so ago for the show. And I think you're in a cafe or a bar or something like that. And you're talking about your observations about the case. And they ended up using some of that in the show. One of the things that the editors and the producers noticed, and they commented to me as well, was, wow, you can see the passage of time from looking at Andy Fox's reporting. And way back when, there's this fresh-faced young cub reporter covering his first important case. Then you're sitting in the bar there talking about your observations about the case 30 years later. And I was teasing you. Andy, they're using you as a timestamp. But the truth is, and this would be true for me too and anybody else, Kristin's laughing. She's much younger than we are. The passage of time impacts all of us. And it will, you too, Ms. Dilley.
Yeah, I know it will. I know.
But I was teasing Andy, but the truth is, it serves as a reminder of how much time has elapsed, because you obviously are not, you're still a good-looking man, but you're not the same kid that you were 30 years ago, first reporting on this case. And so it's funny, when they were editing the thing, everybody picked up on what I was talking about. And I said, Andy Fox actually serves as a timestamp between what was then and what is now, and the passage of time, and how this case and the sadness associated with it stretch out over 3 decades.
When I was watching, and Lonnie, she and Maureen, they had talked with, I think, David Nobling's girlfriend at the time, who was pregnant.
Tara, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Tara.
And so there was this discussion of her, and then there was this discussion of me. And I think it was Lonnie that says, with my part, she goes, well, and you know what? We need to go talk with that reporter, Andy Fox. And I'm going, no, don't come talk to me.
No, it was always,
too late.
I had given them a list of people that I thought were essential to help us build this story. And obviously you were on that list. And when they were talking to me about various people, I said, you need to get this guy, Andy Fox, because you also provide a very important continuity, because you've covered the case since the very beginning. So that's really important. We really appreciated the fact that you were willing to do it.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Then, we knew we were going to be using your clips, and then the contrast was very helpful. But your perspective on the case was extremely important, just like it is here.
And I just did the math. I was 26 years old then. More than I'm now 60. I was 26 years old.
Yeah.
And you know what? I was looking at it, and I was saying, I'm really proud of that reporting, because as sad, especially with the Nobling Edwards case and how the family found out from my reporting, it was all accurate. It was all extremely accurate, because I had really good sources on this, and a lot of the sources were family members. Carl Nobling as an example of that. And so it was very, as I was watching it, I just thought to myself, it was really good reporting, and I'm really proud. I'm really proud of that. Obviously, in hindsight, I wish on the police end of the Nobling Edwards one, that was handled differently, and that the police had more hands-on of the family and being with the family, and they weren't. These people were on their own, and we're the police. And where was the organization of this? And why weren't other people out searching the shores? Huh? Where were the people? Carl Nobling's out there basically alone. And until I show up and I'm with Carl, we're going along the river banks and looking, and we just didn't walk far enough. We did not walk far enough. And we don't know when, because I'm sure that, and it's very deep there as you're walking down that path, and then shot in the head, but in the back of the head, and then they throw the bodies into the water. The current takes them out, and then the current switches, and then it brings the bodies back to where they came to rest. And Carl's out there alone. Carl Nobling was all alone. There wasn't a search group, was there, Bill?
A handful of people. But I know that Mr. Nobling was wearing his waders and had a long stick, and he pushed past I think there were state troopers there at that point, and he told them, as you saw in the show, you can shoot me in the back if you want, but he wasn't going to be prevented from searching for his son.
But I mean, like, I'm looking at like the search. I don't ever remember there being a big, massive search. There was in the Call Haley. Remember, people in the water,
divers, helicopters, boats, dogs. You saw a lot of that in the show. There was a very large scale search. And there were large-scale searches in several of the other examples. No, I don't know. There are aspects of this case to this day where I think to myself, what a train wreck. Just not well handled. And that crime scene at Ragged Island was a
disaster. Let me ask you this, Bill. Which of the investigations did you think was the best into the, it's a loaded question, I know, but which one did you think they messed up less?
They've all got problems. That's
I know, but which one? Which is the...
That's a hard one. It really is. I feel like I'm closest, obviously, to the details, and especially today, of my sister Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski's murder. But there are plenty of problems there, too. Boy, I don't think anybody gets away clean. And I recognize that when you're talking about cases with tens of thousands of hours of effort and terrific investigators working these cases, there are going to be mistakes and there are going to be problems. You don't get a case that stretches on for 30 to 34 years without problems. So I'm trying to be fair, but I don't think anybody gets away clean in any fair telling of the Colonial Parkway murders, because there's so many problems with each and every one of those crime scenes and each and every aspect of these investigations. I think there are dropped balls all over the place. To this day, we're going to be trying to put pressure on the Virginia State Police. They're dragging their feet on advanced forensic testing that I think is way overdue in the Edwards-Noblin case. And we're going to have to push, because the only thing that seems to work is the families keep pushing. And when people have asked me for my advice in other unsolved murders, there are 250,000 cold case homicides in the United States currently, according to the Murder Accountability Project. If you don't keep pushing, nothing will ever happen in your loved one's case. My family made that mistake, which is how we ended up at the 23-year mark with a stone cold case in 2009. And it's only as a result of the kind of coverage that you've given us and that the families have worked together to push for results that we've been able to move this case forward again. That's the whole idea of the television show. I don't think that should surprise anybody.
Well, I think, and I thought it was very well done. I know that because you and I have talked about this, we knew the end. I have a buddy who said, I think it came up short. I think that, it was, but how can it not be left with this unresolved? Of course it's going to end that way.
Some people have asked me recently, was that scripted? And I said, absolutely not. Nothing the four principal investigators who appeared on camera said about their views or the science or how they came to the conclusions that they did. They were not going to be dictated to. For Maureen O'Connell and Lonnie Coombs, they arrived at different conclusions in a very organic, natural way. I know that your friend said, the show kind of ends on a kind of a question mark. I get it, because the case ends up right there in terms of where we are.
And it goes to your answer, which is very true and honest and raw, to my question. Your answer. Which one did they mess up less? Because they messed up them all. And the one thing that they all have in common is that they're unsolved.
When you asked me the question and I was ticking through them and I thought, wait a minute, no, there's there's like significant problems in all four. And so I kept thinking, no, what about? And then I thought, no. Respectfully, look, I'm a believer in law enforcement. Kristin and I don't see ourselves as critics of law enforcement. We're pulling for their success. Obviously, I'm not here to place blame or anything like that. I want to see the Colonial Parkway murders solved. I think we are less than honest with ourselves if we don't admit there have been some problems along the way. It's just like anything else. With time, attention, and resources, I believe this case can be solved.
I think so, too.
That's going to wrap it up for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.